Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I'm going to tell you a story about a war I never wanted to fight. When my father died, he didn't leave me a legacy. He left me a battlefield, a poisoned inheritance that pitted me against a family I barely knew and a world of wealth and power I had spent my life trying to escape. I was a scholar, a quiet man who found comfort in the dusty silence of old books. I was not a soldier, but she, my wife, she was a queen. She was brilliant, she was fearless, and she was my champion. She took up my banner, she drew my battle lines, and she waged a war on my behalf with a strategic genius that left me in awe. For 5 long years, I watched her fight for me, for us, for our future. I entrusted her with everything: my name, my fortune, and my absolute, unconditional faith. I saw her as my protector, my strategist, my partner in a fight for our lives. This story is about the day I discovered that she wasn't the general of my army. She was a double agent, a brilliant spy embedded in my life, and the war she was fighting wasn't for me at all. It was for the enemy, and my inheritance was not the prize of our shared victory. It was simply her fee for the most profound and devastating betrayal I could have ever imagined. His death was a quiet, clinical event, an ending that befitted a man who had lived his life like a corporate transaction. He had been a titan, a predator in a world of finance, a man who had built an empire on the ruins of his competitors. He was also a stranger to me. Our relationship was a cold, distant thing, a series of formal meetings and disappointed silences. I was his only son, but I was not his heir in any way that mattered. I had rejected his world, his values, his name. I had built a small, quiet life for myself, a life of books and modest comfort. She was the architect of that life. We had met in a library, and I had fallen in love with the fire in her mind, with her sharp, analytical brilliance that was a perfect, beautiful counterpoint to my own dreamy intellectualism. She was my everything, the center of my small, happy universe. The news of his death was followed almost immediately by the declaration of war. He had left everything to me, a final, passive-aggressive act designed to drag me back into the world I had disowned. The rest of them, his brothers, his cousins, the children of his other liaisons, they descended like vultures. They contested the will. They hired a team of lawyers who were sharks, men cut from the same cloth as he had been. They were going to tear me apart, bury me in litigation until I surrendered what they believed was rightfully theirs. I was terrified. I was out of my depth, a lamb thrown into a den of wolves. And then she stepped forward. I will never forget that moment. She sat me down at our small kitchen table, took my trembling hands in hers, and she looked at me with an expression of such calm, fierce resolve that it silenced all my fears. "You are not a fighter," she said, her voice a steady, strong anchor in my storm of panic. "But I am. This is not a world you understand, but I do. Let me handle this. Let me be your shield, your strategist. Trust me." And I did. It was the easiest decision I had ever made. I handed the entire war over to her. She became my general, my queen. She vetted and hired our legal team. She was the one who sat in the endless, hostile meetings. She was the one who read the mountains of documents, who deciphered the complex financial structures of his empire. My role was simply to exist, to be the claimant in whose name she fought. She would come home from these battles, her face a mask of weary determination, and she would tell me of the day's skirmishes. She would explain the legal maneuvers, the delays, the strategic retreats and advances. I understood little of it, but I understood her. I saw her strength, her brilliance, her unwavering devotion. My love for her, which I thought was already a boundless thing, expanded into a form of worship. She was my warrior, and she was fighting for our future, a future of peace and security that his tainted money could, ironically, provide. I had given her my complete, unconditional trust. I had no idea I was arming my own executioner. The war dragged on for years, a grinding, brutal siege that consumed our lives. Our quiet, academic world was replaced by the harsh, ugly language of litigation. My name was no longer that of a scholar, but of a plaintiff, a headline in the financial pages. The cost, both emotional and financial, was immense. The legal fees were a monstrous, ever-growing beast, devouring the smaller, more liquid parts of the estate before the main battle was even won. She managed it all with a stoic, brilliant efficiency. She was the one who approved the payments, who negotiated with the lawyers, who made the difficult decisions about which assets to sacrifice to fund the ongoing fight. I was shielded from the ugly details, a protected monarch in a kingdom under siege. She insisted upon it. "Your mind is your gift," she would tell me, her hands on my shoulders, her eyes full of a fierce, protective love. "You cannot cloud it with this filth. Let me be the one who wades into the mud. You just need to be ready for the peace that comes after." And I loved her for it. I saw her sacrifice, the toll the long years of battle were taking on her. There were dark circles under her eyes, a new tension in her jaw. She started taking long, late-night phone calls in her office, her voice a low, urgent murmur. I would hear the pacing of her footsteps through the floorboards, a restless, caged energy. When I would ask, she would tell me it was the lawyers, a new crisis, another strategic hurdle to overcome. I would see her sometimes, sitting across a restaurant table with one of them, the opposing counsel, a man who was supposed to be our sworn enemy. She would see me and she would smile and wave, and later she would explain it was a back-channel negotiation, a necessary if distasteful part of the game, a way to probe for weaknesses. It all made sense. She was playing chess at a level I could not comprehend, and I admired her for her courage, for her willingness to do the dirty work. I felt a surge of guilt for my own passive role, for my own weakness. I was a passenger, and she was the one navigating our ship through a hurricane. The first and only time I questioned her, I was left feeling ashamed of my own suspicion. I had accidentally seen an email on her laptop, a draft of a proposal to them, the enemy camp, outlining a complex restructuring of one of his major holding companies. It seemed to me, in my limited understanding, that she was giving away a key asset. When I asked her about it, my voice hesitant and apologetic, her reaction was not anger but a profound, weary sadness. "Do you not trust me?" Asked, her voice quiet, wounded. "After all this is strategy, not surrender. We sacrifice a pawn to put their king in check. You must let me do this my way." The look in her eyes, a mixture of hurt and exhaustion, was a dagger in my heart. I felt like a fool, a cowardly peasant questioning the brilliance of his queen. I apologized profusely, and I never questioned her again. I retreated back into the safety of my ignorance, my trust in her now reinforced by a layer of my own shame. I had failed the one test of faith she had asked of me. I would not fail her again. After 5 years, a lifetime of battle, the war was over. She announced it one evening, not with a triumphant shout, but with a quiet, exhausted sigh. She walked into my study, a single, thick document in her hand, and she said, "It's done. We've won." The settlement had been reached. It was a complex, labyrinthine agreement, a testament to the years of intricate legal warfare. She explained the broad strokes to me. We had not gotten everything, of course. There had been compromises, concessions. But the core of the empire, the vast majority of the wealth, was ours. The war was over. We had survived. We were rich. The relief was a physical thing, a great shuddering release of a tension I had been carrying in my bones for half a decade. I didn't care about the money. I cared about the peace. I cared about getting her back, the brilliant, vibrant woman who had been subsumed by the role of the warrior. I saw our future stretching out before us, a quiet, sunlit path, free from the ghosts of my father and the ugliness of his world. We had our victory, and now we could finally have our life. But in the weeks that followed, a strange, unsettling quiet descended. The peace I had craved felt different, hollow. She was distant, preoccupied, still locked in the world of numbers and documents. The victory had not brought her the relief I had expected. It had simply transitioned her into a new phase of intense, solitary work. She explained, unwinding the complexities of the settlement, setting up the trusts, managing the transfer of assets. It was, she said, the most critical phase of all. "The war is won," she told me, "but now we must secure the peace." It sounded logical, responsible, but it felt wrong. She was a fortress and the drawbridge was up. The moment of revelation, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, mundane accident. I was looking for a book in the attic, A first edition of a poet my father, had surprisingly loved. I was moving boxes, old containers of his personal effects that had been sent from his estate. In the bottom of one of the boxes, I found a small, locked metal strongbox. The key was taped to the bottom, an oversight in his otherwise meticulous world. Inside was not jewelry or cash, but a series of thin, leather-bound ledgers. They were his private journals, his secret thoughts, written in a tight, precise script. I sat on the dusty floor of the attic and I began to read. And the man I thought I knew, the cold, distant stranger, began to emerge in a new, more complex light. He wrote of his regrets, his fears, and his profound, crippling loneliness. But mostly, he wrote about his business. And in the final volume, dated in the years just before his death, he began to write about her. He had met her secretly several times. He had been testing her, assessing her. He hadn't seen her as his son's wife. He had seen her as a potential successor. He wrote of her brilliance, her ambition, her glorious, unsentimental ruthlessness. He saw in her the heir he had always wanted, the child who was his equal in spirit if not in blood. And then I found the final entry, written a week before he died. It was a description of their last meeting, a meeting where he had made her a proposal. He would leave everything to me, his weak, disappointing, but morally decent son, knowing it would trigger a war with the rest of the family. He knew I would be unable to fight it. He knew I would turn to her, and he had made her an offer. If she could shepherd the bulk of the estate through the ensuing chaos, if she could outmaneuver the rest of them and consolidate the power, he would see to it, through a series of legal instruments he had already prepared, that she, and she alone, would be the ultimate beneficiary. His will was not an inheritance for me. It was a test for her. It was a coronation. I sat there in the dusty, silent attic, the journal in my hands, and the last 5 years of my life rearranged themselves into a new, horrifying mosaic. The war had not been a fight for me. It had been her final exam. The enemy had not been her enemy. They were simply the other candidates for the throne. Her sacrifices, her exhaustion, her devotion, it was all a performance, the greatest role of her life. She had not been my champion, she had been his, and she had passed his test with flying colors. The walk down from the attic was the longest journey of my life. I was a ghost descending into a house that had never been my own. I was a stranger in a life that had been a lie. I found her in the study, the same room where she had announced our victory. She was at the large, mahogany desk that had been his, surrounded by piles of financial documents, a queen upon her throne. She looked up as I entered, her expression one of focused, intense concentration. She did not look like my wife. She looked like him. I did not speak. I simply placed the open journal on the desk in front of her on top of a complex-looking spreadsheet. I pointed to the final entry, his final testament to her brilliance, his final betrayal of me. She read the words. Her face did not register shock or guilt or even fear. Her expression was one of profound, quiet, and utterly chilling validation. It was the look of a student who has just received a perfect grade from the teacher she most admired. She looked up at me, and her eyes were not the eyes of the woman I had loved. They were his eyes, cold, clear, and unsentimental. "So you know," she said, her voice a calm, even statement of fact. "He was the only one who ever truly saw me, the only one who understood what I was capable of." And what was that? I asked, my own voice a hollow echo in the room. Was it love? Was it a partnership? Or was it just the longest, cruelest business transaction in history? "It wasn't a transaction," she said, a flicker of something, perhaps pity, in her eyes. "It was an ascension. He gave me a kingdom and I conquered it. You were never meant to be the king. You were the key to the castle gates, a necessary but ultimately temporary part of the process." Her words were not an apology. They were a final report, a dispassionate summary of a successful project. I was a line item, a logistical necessity. The love, the marriage, the shared life, it was all just collateral, a cost of doing business. The betrayal was so complete, so fundamentally perfect that it was almost beautiful, a masterpiece of deception. She had not just stolen my inheritance, she had stolen my reality. She had used my love as a weapon, my trust as a tool, and my own identity as a disguise. And what now? I asked. Do you expect me to just disappear, to accept my role as the temporary key and walk away? That would be the simplest solution, she said, her voice still calm, still reasonable. You are not built for this world. You would not know what to do with this kind of power. I am offering you a generous severance package. A life of comfort, of peace, the very life you always wanted, free from the burden of his name and his empire. She had it all planned. My exit. My quiet, comfortable retirement into obscurity. She was not just a conqueror. She was a benevolent one, offering her deposed, useless king a small, gilded cage to live out his days in. And in that moment, something inside me broke. Or perhaps something was born. The quiet scholar, the gentle, trusting husband, the man who had always run from his father's world, died in that room. And in his place, something new, something cold and hard and familiar began to take shape. It was the part of me that was his son, the part of me that understood the language of warfare, not from books but from blood. No, I said, my voice no longer a whisper but a low, steady thing that seemed to surprise us both. I think the severance package is unacceptable. I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, not as my wife, but as my opponent, my adversary, my equal. You have his ambition, I said. You have his ruthlessness, but you seem to have forgotten one thing. I have his name, and I am about to show you what it's worth. I walked out of that room, and I did not look back. The war for my inheritance was over. The war for my soul had just begun. The legal battle that followed was not like the first one. This time I was not a passive observer. I was the general. I took the evidence from his journals, the proof of their conspiracy, and I waged a war so total, so scorched earth, that it would have made my father proud. I did not fight to win the money. I fought to burn her kingdom to the ground. In the end, the empire was shattered, broken into a dozen pieces by the force of our mutual destruction. We both walked away with a fraction of the original prize, two wounded animals limping away from a battle that had no victor. I live a quiet life now, a life of solitude. I have enough to be comfortable, but I am not the man I was. The scholar is gone. The loving husband is a ghost. All that is left is the son of a titan, a man who has learned the brutal, terrible lesson his father always wanted to teach him. In the end, you are alone, and the only thing you can truly trust is your own capacity to fight. It was the last and most valuable part of my inheritance. Thanks for being here on Reddit Whispers. I've shared my story, but now I want to hear yours. What's the most surprising decision that turned everything around for you? Your comment could be the lifeline someone else is looking for today.